were his words. And shortly after the onslaught began, he was one of the first to be assassinated and eliminated. And now, of course, tens of thousands in that country have just vanished and disappeared in a slaughter that is going on, almost reminiscent of what happened in Rwanda in the mid-1990s. And the world stands back and watches, and we seem completely handcuffed to know what to do about all of this. It was Malcolm Muggeridge, who was writing in the 70s, who said this: "It is difficult to resist the conclusion that 20th century man has decided to abolish himself. Tired of the struggle to be himself, he has created boredom out of his own affluence, impotence out of his own erotomania, and vulnerability out of his own strength. He himself blows the trumpet that brings the walls of his own cities crashing down, until at last, having educated himself into imbecility, having drugged and polluted himself into stupefaction, he keels over, a weary, battered old brontosaurus, and becomes extinct." I had the privilege of being with Mr. Muggeridge just a short while before he died in 1990. He really thought that the world was skidding out of control, and he blamed it on 3 or 4 major types of institutions in our time that ultimately would lead to a worldwide carnage. That's what Muggeridge believed. He was often known for his rather pessimistic view of life, but he was also a latecomer to Christ, and in his book, Jesus Rediscovered, he tells his story, and also in his book on Mother Teresa, which he wrote, Something Beautiful for God. But 10 years before that, Dr. Martin Luther King, when he received the Nobel Prize for Peace, said this: "I accept this award today with an audacious faith in the future of mankind. I refuse to accept the idea that the isness of man's present nature makes him morally incapable of reaching up for the eternal oughtness that forever confronts him. I refuse to accept that man is mere flotsam and jetsam in a river of life which surrounds him. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of thermonuclear destruction. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality." 1964. Unarmed truth and unconditional love. I want to pause and ask you this question right from the beginning. Think of those 2 phrases, unarmed truth and unconditional love. When our entire cultural ethos is now being defined in a naturalistic framework with a scientific single vision, where naturalists think in grabbing the finger of one discipline, they are grabbing the entire fist of reality. What does that discipline have to say about unarmed truth and unconditional love, when both of those are metaphysical, if not spiritual, propositions? Whatever does unconditional love mean? What does unarmed truth mean, and why so? So as we head at a higher speed now because of the rapidity of change, and as someone has said, the faster you are moving, the farther ahead you had better be able to see. As we are moving with this high speed of change, are we aware of all that we are bringing about in our time? The weapons of warfare multiply rapidly, and those in control of the armaments are getting less and less accountable. It was Aldous Huxley writing in 1946 who said, "We are living today not in the delicious intoxication of the early successes of science, rather in the grisly morning after, where it has become quite apparent that what science may have actually done is to introduce us to improved means in order to obtain hitherto unimproved or rather deteriorated ends." It's given us great means. How are we going to define the ends? One of the great privileges of a university is that you study different disciplines so that you can find the unity in the diversity of the disciplines you study, and not allow just one single discipline to run away with a hegemonous goal in mind to dominate all of the interpretations of life. The realities before us are huge and massive. And if you take that macrocosmic view and then filter it down right at the tip of the funnel to the other end of it, what do I hear more often than anything else as I travel? And my colleagues will tell you the same thing. Whether we are at Uppsala University in Europe, or in one of the universities of India, or the Middle East, or in Asia, or here, the bottom line for most young men and women today is the quest for meaning. What is it that my life really means, and where do I find the source of meaning? On the opening engagement that I had this year, I've never spoken to such a vast, just once maybe before that, larger than that, but I was speaking to 40,000 university students in one setting on the 4th of January this year. They were in 3 different venues in a live audience, and then tens of thousands scattered across the globe. Now, there were, I think, 115 universities represented in that audience, over 40 different countries. And those who came to people for help, asking their questions. Fascinating what the top 2 questions were from this age bracket of 18 to 24. You might never guess it. The number 1 question was how to deal with the enslavement of pornography. Number 2, how to resist the urge to kill myself. Sensuality and suicide were the 2 major issues in the mind of the young. I don't know if they saw the connection. I am one of those who came to know Jesus Christ from a bed of suicide at the age of 17 when I lay in a hospital bed in Delhi. I know what that urge is all about. When all hope goes away and shame takes over and you really don't want to face another day. But I wonder if they saw the connection. In the first, you really dehumanize and denude somebody else. In the second, you've ultimately dehumanized yourself and denuded yourself of any value. So you see, while politicians wrestle with the horizontal axis of right and left, they have forgotten that there is an up and a down. We are not going to find answers from either the right or the left, and all we need to do is listen to the debates going on and the language that takes over, the animus that takes over. And this is supposed to be one of the most civilized cultures in the world today. And what we are watching makes a circus look a pleasant relief to go and watch that instead. This is really the kind of time in which we're living. And the world is taking note. I want to answer for you from the Judeo-Christian vantage point, what does it mean to be human? What gives human life value? As I've looked at different worldviews and studied different worldviews, I have never found such a coherent set of answers as that which comes to us as presented in the gospel narrative and in the teachings of Jesus Christ. See, C.S. Lewis put it in these words. He said, when a ship goes into the high seas, it has to answer 3 questions. Number 1, how to keep from sinking. He said that's personal ethics. Number 2, how to keep from bumping into other ships. That's social ethics. He said number 3 is the most important of them all. Why is it out there in the first place? That is essential ethics. That's where you get your categories from. Why are we out there in the first place? Then we learn how to keep from sinking, and finally, how to keep from bumping into other ships. Within the Judeo-Christian worldview, we have at least 4 major sources of inspiration that define for us who we are. The first is in the belief that we are not here by accident. We are not the random collocation of atoms. We are not a blip on the radar screen of time, or an empty bubble floating on the sea of nothingness. We are actually here by design, the design of a creator. And in that created order, we are given the purpose for why we were created. And in that created order, there are 2 implications that emerge. Number 1 is we are given intrinsic worth, essential worth, not extraneous worth, not worth given by states or laws or cities or cultures, but that we have intrinsic value given to us by God Himself. In fact, that's how one of the conjoining of the words of worship comes together, worship, where God himself is the ultimate worthy being, and from that we derive our very definitions. Intrinsic worth. And there are really two deductions that follow from this. First of all, let's remember what Moses gave. He gave 613 laws. That came on the heels of violating just one law. There was only one law. Not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. However you want to see that, the proposition is basically this: don't play God. Don't play God. Don't be the definer of good and evil. When that law was violated, do you realize how many thousands of laws we now need because every individual plays God? You get onto a plane, and they tell you not to touch, tamper, disable, or destroy the smoke detector. Why such verbosity? Just say, don't mess with it, and that's enough. Because in a court of law, a person can say, I didn't touch it, I just disabled it. I just tampered with it. So 4 different qualifications are given till in a court of law, every statement can die the death of 1,000 qualifications. One lawyer told me you can no longer safely ask somebody, were you ever alone with that person in the room? Because that person can say no, even if they were, because in his mind he can say, if I were with this person, I was not alone. So the very word alone it signifies something that the moment you say, were you ever alone with this other person, that can be messed up. So now just for our health laws, we need thousands of pages. Think of all the other laws that have to be enacted in order to cover up 1 or 2 simple laws. Don't play God. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That was violated, and look at what has happened today. A man can be beheading somebody miles away from here on television and play God. And play God. Someone else can be screaming out and saying, don't do this. This is not what God intends of us. But autonomy has moved to this direction where we have become a law unto ourselves. And the question that you and I have to ask is, what did God actually say to start with? Moses gave 613 laws because one was violated. And then Isaiah reduced them to 15. David reduced them to 11. Micah reduced them to 3, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. Jesus was asked by a clever man, which is the greatest commandment? I would have thought for Jesus to really play the cavalier man there, he could have said, there's one law and I'm going to give it to you. He didn't. He said, the laws are these, of the greatest importance: to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and all your strength, vertical, and to love your neighbor as yourself. He said, on these 2 hang all of the laws and the commandments, all of the prophets and the commandments. On these 2, because of the one, the second necessarily follows. Without the first, the second is with its feet firmly planted in midair. For the Judeo-Christian viewpoint, these 2 laws are inextricably joined. If I claim to love the Lord my God with all my heart and all my soul and all my strength and violate you, I am violating the heart of that very law that I am claiming. I was just telling some friends, it's been a long time since I even mentioned this, and I used to stay in a hotel in Bangkok called the Oriental Hotel, where a friend of mine was the general manager for 40-some years, one of the finest places in the world. They have an author's wing. It's a beautiful place to write. You're looking over the magnificent Chao Phraya River, and you can sit at your desk and write. If you've been there, you know it's a splendid place. But as soon as you come out of that, about 20 paces ahead, all the guys are marketing all the stuff you can imagine. And there's a fellow I watch coming in the morning at dawn, and he'll take his incense sticks and move it around the shrine and then take some fruit and put it there and plant it over there. Then a little later in the day, about 6 in the evening, when you walk by, he dips into his pocket as every tourist walks by and unfurls a slew of pictures of unclad men and women, asking if you'd like to go there for the night out. And he said, would you like a happy hour? So one day I stopped him. They know me from going there. I said, I feel very badly for you that you have only 1 hour that's happy every day. I said, is that all you got to give? One happy hour? I said, I'm happy every hour of the day. So after that, every time I go by, he calls all his friends. There's the man who's happy every hour of the day, you know. So I stopped him. I said, I have a question for you. I said, you know, I look out of my window in the morning. You take the incense and you take some fruit and you place it right by that shrine there. Am I right? He said, yes. I said, what are you doing at the end of the day? Unfurling all this stuff and selling the bodies of young men and young women. I said, I'm a Christian. You may not be, but I can tell you this. Gautama Buddha would not be very proud of you. He was just stunned. There is no intrinsic worth in merely ethical religions because, you see, ethical systems find ways of dodging the bullet. And whatever you do, you say, I will pay it in the next life, or I will do it this way or do it that way. And the truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, when the Bible tells you and me that you are created imago Dei, the image of God, it pays you and me the greatest compliment. Immediately after that conversation comes another one. That was pitting law against law. This is pitting politics against politics. So they look at him and they say to him, is it all right to pay taxes to Caesar? To Jesus. It's one question I so dearly wish Jesus had answered differently. Because on April 15th, you could be both rebellious and religious at the same time. And Jesus looked at him and said, do you have a coin? And a man said, yes. He said, give it to me. He said, whose image do you see on this coin? He said, it's Caesar's. He says, give to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and give to God that which is God's. The man should have had a follow-up question. The follow-up question would have been, what belongs to God? And Jesus would have said, whose image is on you? You are created as a being of intrinsic worth. And the Ten Commandments basically tell you this, that your life is sacred, and all of your possessions and your activities ought to express that sacredness with which God has endowed you. Your marriage is sacred, your property is sacred, your word should be sacred, your worship sacred, and that is the heart of what Christ really points to. And so in the created order, I find that intrinsic worth. And I also have beyond that the reflective splendor. Now this is an important point. While we share with our fellow human beings all that is common in the intrinsic worth, we have what we call in the microcosm of our lives relationships that bring about a reflective splendor, either of a family or of the family tree. However you want to take it, there are particularities of value to your life and mine in a relationship more than it is just in a generality. And this is true. Well, Prime Minister Konoye of Japan, when he committed suicide, had on his night table Oscar Wilde's De Profundis, and when they found his body the next morning, they noticed the book was turned face down, and when they turned it up, he had underlined the words of what that Wilde had used there. As terrible as it was what I had done to the world, nothing was as terrible as what I had done to myself. You are a creature of value to God. You're also an entity of value to particular people in particular relationships who will care for you and walk the extra mile. My wife would have been here at this set of meetings, but she's in Toronto, Canada right now, taking care of a 96-year-old mother who was hit by a car. And she's been standing by the side of her mother for almost nonstop for the last 6 weeks. How can I leave my mom? I have to be there. Go to the other end of the spectrum. My little grandson, Jude, who is 4 now, several months ago, and he's three and a half or so, he's running around the house playing, and his mother can't find her car keys, and so she stops, my daughter Naomi stops, slaps her forehead and says, I must be losing my mind. And this little boy comes and stands in front of her and says, Mommy, whatever you do, please don't ever lose your heart, because I'm in there. From the age of a 96-year-old mother who needs her daughter by her side to a little child, the Bible says, what is there in man that you're mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you visit him? Out of the mouths of infants and babes you have ordained praise. the reality of intrinsic worth. My son went to Taylor University, graduated from there some years ago. And it was a few years ago in Taylor that a real tragedy had taken place. It was in 2006, where some kids were coming back after a weekend with some staff and faculty. I forget all. They were in a vat, and an errant truck crossed over the median, slammed into them. Most of them were just smashed and killed. One student survived. And so the coroner came, identified every one of them of all that had been, all the damage that was done. And there was a young girl by the name of Laura Van Ryn that was still living, and they called the Van Ryn family, and the Van Ryn family came and spent time by her bedside for days and days and weeks and weeks. If I remember the story correctly, Laura's boyfriend was also there through much of that time, but he kept saying, her answers are not making sense. Her answers are not making sense. And they would say to him, what do you expect? She's been so battered, the hair is matted, the face is distorted, the brain is affected. Give her time, give her time. He said, no, something is not right. So finally, one day in a very coherent conversation, she looks at them and says, I don't know why you keep calling me Laura. I'm not Laura. Say, then who are you? He says, my name is Whitney. My name is Whitney Sirac. Why do you keep calling me Laura? You're not my parents. Parents were stunned. They contacted the office and then contacted the coroner, only to find out that no DNA testing had been done. He instantly lost his job. This was Whitney Sirac. This was not Laura Van Ryn. The Sirac family had to be informed that the funeral that they had and buried their daughter was not really their daughter. It was Laura in that grave. That their daughter, Whitney, is really in the hospital room recovering. And so the Van Ryns pack up their bags and go to the grave. And the Siracs leave their home and come to visit their daughter, who's still alive. You see, there's a particularity to a life. And only God is big enough to give value to all of humanity and build a relationship with you individually so that you know you are cared for and loved, all of your shortcomings and weaknesses and frailties notwithstanding. When I left the hospital after having attempted to take my life in Delhi, the doctor looked at me and said this, we've given you back your life, but we cannot make you want to live. I said, sir, that's been taken care of as well. When for the first time a Bible had been opened up before me, the beautiful thing about the teaching of Jesus Christ is the reminder to you and to me that the relationship he offers is a personal one, your individual worth and your individual value. And so when we see the essential intrinsic worth, we also see a reflective splendor.
You've been watching Let My People Think with Dr. Ravi Zacharias. We're grateful for your prayers and financial support. If you'd like to know more about this ministry or would like to donate to our efforts, you can call us at 1-800-448-6766 or visit us online at www.rzim.org. You can also stay connected to RZIM through Twitter and Facebook. Our mailing address is RZIM, Post Office Box 921-939, Norcross, Georgia, 30010.
Hello, friends. This is Ravi Zacharias. We've been in this ministry at RZIM for over 30 years now. But one of the most thrilling things is about to take place in the launch of our Zacharias Institute. The building for that has already been purchased. It's the biggest endeavor we have ever gone into. It'll be